Lamplight Universe presents Treasure Hunters, a Kingdom of Florida adventure. Chapter 1. The journey begins. West Palm Beach, Florida, 1948.
We set out to explore the uncharted high seas, to perhaps claim some uninhabited island or landmass. I hope in the following entries to give an account of this expedition and anything that we shall find on our way. I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. No attachments to keep me grounded ashore, no family to hurry home to, and no reason to prevent me from seeing the great, wide ocean and, perhaps, the place beyond the sea. It was my hope and intention to find a certain lost city of Atlantis, or maybe even the famed Bermuda Triangle, two fabled places that have been cause for such mystery and intrigue. But, as fate would have it, I was not to find these ancient cities or geographical anomalies. It was fate's intent for me to find love.
Jesse, snap to it.
Aye, sir.
We're drifting too far to port. Bring us around. Starboard.
Our ship was christened the Buena Aventura, the Good Adventure. It was only our first day of the journey when we faced the first of many challenges. We had sailed straight on course when, out of nowhere, our vessel was engulfed by a dark sky, a portent of the terrible storm.
What sort of wicked omen is this?
Don't know, don't care. Just get us out of here.
Haywood, I said starboard.
Too late, sir.
Brace yourselves, lads.
The ship was ripped in two. The crew and the two halves of the valiant vessel were scattered even more, and many disappeared into the dark blue depths, never to be seen again by my own eyes. Then, out of the bleak, cold storm, I experienced two strange sensations: light and sound. When I awoke, I was caked in sand and seawater. It was the soothing, rhythmic sweep of the tide that lulled me out of my slumber. I looked around at the place where I was now made conscious, and thought at first that I had been washed back to the beaches of my home, the beaches where we had set out from our journey. But it was no such place. No, this was an entirely different and wondrous place. Had I stumbled upon some tropical paradise by accident? No, by fate? Surely my compatriots had not been as lucky or as fortunate, for they were nowhere to be seen. The only remnants of our perilous journey were a few splintered boards and my own salt-soaked and near-lifeless body. When I could finally gather the strength to lift myself from the water's edge, I stumbled up the beach toward a verdant tree line. Large and leathery leaves intermingled with luscious trees of fruit, delectable to the eyes and, I presumed, the taste. I ate of one such curious fruit and found these things to be true. In fact, it tasted much like the guava fruit. But within moments, before I could even finish a few bites, I grew quickly drowsy and fell back on the sand. When I awoke this time, I discerned that I was now inside some sort of tent in the jungle, for the sounds of its many inhabitants could be heard faintly around and beyond. Ropes were wrapped around my wrists and ankles to keep me from running. It was at this moment that my captor returned to the tent, brandishing a large sword. Removing a head covering, this mysterious figure revealed herself, a young woman of the utmost beauty and poise. Her dark complexion was accentuated by piercing eyes, the type of eyes that see the world with both a compassion and a fire.
Outsider,
The woman said, as I recoiled at the sight of the sword.
tell me, Can you read the tongue of Coronado?
She held out the sharp blade for me to see. An inscription was engraved into the metal.
We call it Spanish,
I said hesitantly, recognizing the lettering.
Well, can you read it?
I nodded. She introduced herself as Coral. This warrior woman, whom I would soon learn was a princess in this strange land, freed me from my bonds and enlisted my service and skills as a translator of what she perceived to be a foreign tongue engraved across the blade of the sword. In fact, the message was written in Spanish, a language that I developed a minor familiarity with during my years growing up in southern Florida. Apparently, the message of this sword was to provide a clue to the whereabouts of a great treasure, a trove stolen from the family of this beautiful and intriguing princess many generations ago. At this point in the story, I must skip ahead, for many of the preceding pages have been torn from this very journal by a fearsome rival known as Captain Zinka, a terrible pirate hell-bent on ensuring that no one ever finds the hiding place of the treasure he stole, including a magical gem of great importance to Coral's royal lineage. It's a shame, really, but I haven't the time, space, or remembrance to recollect or recreate their contents. But for your sake, dear reader, what you must know is that this magical land in which I found myself is a parallel world and a near-exact replica of our own homeland of Florida, though certain geographical features vary. New lakes and rivers, and the presence of mountains, for example. There are portals and thin places through which one might pass between these lands, but they are few and far between. And in our adventures in this new world, we faced our fair share of perilous experiences and close encounters with danger. But those are stories for another time. The only other item worth rewriting here is that of my eventual betrothal to the brave Princess Coral of Mangonia, with whom I had fallen instantly and madly in love. My dearest Coral and I, having bound ourselves to one another through the promise of future matrimony, embarked on a quest to reclaim not only the lost treasure of Mangonia, but other treasures as well. For the princess informs me that there are not one, but 3 enchanted gemstones that once belonged to the first rulers of this mysterious kingdom. These fabled gems, save for the Gem of Might, have not been seen for many generations. It is Coral's belief that if a single individual were to possess all 3 gems, they would be nigh unstoppable. Coral provided access to ancient volumes and scrolls from the royal library, wherein we deigned to discern the current resting places of these ancient and powerful treasures. I received a notable education in the nature of these magic stones, and will jot some notes here forthwith, though their whereabouts remain enigmatic, for these volumes have not been brought up to date to account for the number of thefts, losses, and the like that the gems have suffered. One such artifact that is part of the treasure we seek is the fabled Gem of Transfiguration. According to my dearest love and companion, this is one of 3 magical gems given to the first 3 kings of this strange land. As my ink can only write in a single color, black, I am unable to properly convey its hue. By all accounts, I have surmised that this gem is a large, radiant ruby, most beautiful and a shimmer when light is cast across it. However, being that we knew very little of its final destination, my dearest Coral and I took to searching for another historic artifact until more concrete intelligence would present itself. Our new and immediate quest would bring us to search for a mask, something the native people refer to as the Mask of Memories. And what is the significance of this Mask of Memories, you may wonder? According to the legends told to me, and the stories in the library's tomes, the mask was fashioned some time ago by a tribe native to an island off the coast of the kingdom. These stories of its power spread through pirates, merchants, and other tradesmen and explorers who were brave enough to venture out into this uncharted chain of islands separated from the mainland by a short stretch of water. They say that the wearer of this mask can view moments of history, the past, through the eye holes of the artifact. If its power is real, perhaps we might look back into the past to understand what became of the remaining gems of power. With all of the strange and spectacular happenings that I've experienced thus far in my short time in the kingdom, I have little reason to doubt that such a power exists. Our preparations for the journey were swift and minimal. I was responsible for gathering some provisions for the several-day journey, while Coral ensured that we had the proper tools with which to locate the mask. Her family's enchanted map, which, when illuminated, reveals markings to indicate one's route, a small brass compass that I discovered on our most recent adventure, and a proper crew to complement the pair of us. Those who joined with us were Ginger, one of Coral's younger sisters.
Sister, if you're going on an adventure, I'm coming with you. I'm not letting you have all the fun without me.
And Bastian, a sturdy, broad-shouldered man who spoke very little, but provided an invaluable asset in both his knowledge of navigating the high seas and his brute strength.
Where you go, I go, princess.
A handful of other men from the royal militia accompanied us as well to provide further assistance in manning our ship, the Queen Lily, named for Coral's late mother, whom I never had the pleasure to meet. I, for one, was happy to take respite from my role in the palace stables. Though I was honored to serve my gracious future father-in-law, King of Vernia, in such a way, my heart longed for a return to the vast open seas, the deep blues and greens and the salty air that all filled me with such life and vigor. All of these sensitivities washed over and returned to me as our vessel set out from its mooring on the northern coast. It was to be a day or two until we reached the first of the so-called Wayward Isles, provided the weather remained favorable, so we passed the time with trivial amusements and stories of our worlds, I sharing about my home, which the people here refer to as the other world, and the rest enlightening my mind to the nature of this magical kingdom. It was late afternoon on our second day out from port, when Bastian espied the first signs of these fabled islands. Like a distant mirage on the horizon at first, the northernmost isle grew gradually into view as we sailed onward into the early golden hours of dusk. It resembled any other small island typical of the Caribbean, a thin strip of sandy beach wrapping around its border, a shrubby and verdant tree line too thick to see through, and coconut palm trees sprouting up here and there. At this moment I supposed that we were not far from the place my former ship, the Buenaventura, was torn to pieces and its remains run aground. Immediately my thoughts turned to my fallen comrades, the members of my crew who had been lost to the dark ocean depths. While I stared off toward the mainland, I heard a familiar voice lulling my attention elsewhere.
Beyond that one,
Coral instructed, pointing a slender finger toward the verdant patch on the horizon.
sail just beyond that island and we'll come upon the isle we're searching for.
As our ship drew near, we veered so that we might move past the landmass in the foreground to find the second one that stood beyond it. To my own eyes, in the fading violet light, it seemed as if both islands were actually connected as one. However, upon closer inspection it became clear that a narrow intracoastal rivulet of shallow salt water ran between the two, separating them into distinct mounds. It was this second island that we were searching for, according to what little information Coral and I had been able to garner from our studies in the Royal Library. She had to cross-reference a rudimentary sketch of a map, which labeled the place as Island of Beasts, a name not used on any other chart, with the larger, more reliable one she'd inherited, or rather purloined, to be completely honest, from her father's throne room. And noticing that the shapes of their outlines matched, Coral was then able to use the fuller map to guide our way. A pair of crewmen dropped anchor as we drifted just offshore, Since it had already grown dark by the time of our arrival, the entire crew remained on board for the duration of the night, where we ate a hearty meal of the delicacies that had been packed and prepared by the palace cook. Afterwards, some of the crew unpacked stringed instruments and plucked a folk tune that was apparently well known in the region they hail from. Then, satisfied by the food in our belly and the music in our ears, we drifted off to sleep, with the lull of the ship upon the waters to carry us into that enviable slumber state. Some time, about midnight, I surmised, I awoke with a start. A shriek echoed across the still waters. Carried by a cool breeze from the island at whose doorstep we drifted, such that every hair on the back of my neck stood upright, and I myself stood breathless. Though I hated to wake the others from their peaceful sleep, I couldn't bear to be the only one awake when such a terrifying sound was allowed to reverberate across the ocean. I moved slowly toward the cabin, where Coral and Ginger slept, and reached toward the door. As my fingers wrapped around the cold steel handle, I felt the door quickly pushed open from within. I nearly urinated out of fright and fell backwards with a clamor on the damp wood. The silhouette became illuminated, Coral, looking just as shocked as I. She reached out her hand and whispered quietly.
You heard it too?
I gave a nod as she helped me from the floor. Then the two of us climbed to a place along the deck where we might get a better view of the island and, perhaps, whatever creature from which this horrific wail had originated. While the two of us stood peering into the distant tree line, we heard the sound again. The screech reminded me of the stray cats that wandered about the edges of the house I grew up in. Whenever one of the cadaverous felines ran into another vile creature, like a rat for instance, it would let out a terrifying screech moan. Whatever it was that made the noise on the island, though, was no stray house cat. It was much larger, judging by the sound. I instinctively reached for Coral's hand, which met mine in a tight and sweaty squeeze. We waited in silence for what felt like hours until we were satisfied that the sound had subsided. Perhaps the creature had gone to sleep, we surmised, so we might as well do the same. Coral disappeared back into her cabin, while I returned to my place with the other men on the deck. Try as I might, I couldn't seem to fall back to sleep. I tried shutting my eyes, tossing and turning as I imagined enormous fangs, bloodthirsty animals, and razor-sharp talons. Though I don't remember falling asleep, I must have, for at some point I awoke as the first rays of the morning sun split through the wooden railing and met my eyes. Strangely, no other members of the crew had heard the screech in the night. This did little to put my mind at ease as we ate a quick breakfast and gathered into a rowboat. Bastian and Ginger lowered the compact smaller craft off the port side of our ship. Then we rowed at a steady pace until we arrived at the edge of the shore and took the first crunchy steps onto its white sands. To my relief, Bastian led the way up to the edge of the jungle. A flock of colorful birds with oblong beaks issued from the treetops, startled as our guide hacked a path through the thicket. There were a variety of squawks, howls, and hoots in our ears as we made our way across the soft underbrush, sheltered from the rising sun by the tightly knit canopy above. But the absence of the previous night's shrieks made my heart uneasy. We had very little information to guide us to the location of the fabled Mask of Memories, so I was thankful to be reminded of the Lilliputian scale of the island upon which we journeyed. Coral had confidence that an item of such great worth would reveal itself without too much effort, so on we trudged, deeper into the island of beasts. Our party came to a halt upon hearing a resounding and piercing noise. The same shriek Coral and I had heard at midnight. This time, to my dismay, it sounded incredibly close, perhaps just beyond the large waxy leaves that hemmed us onto our present path. Island of beasts indeed, I thought, trying to remain calm and still. Just behind me, I heard a patch of thick leaves crunch like a fresh stalk of fractured celery. I whipped around, positioning myself so that Coral and Ginger were shielded by my admittedly scrawny arms. We watched as the greenery rustled and an immense furry being sauntered toward us out of the dappled shadows. It was a gargantuan tiger, complete with a rusty coat and dark stripes that crossed its back. The creature bared its fangs, dripping with saliva, and what looked like a fragment of an unfinished, unlucky prior meal. The tiger's eyes were bloodshot, and the beast stood at least as tall as me, the height of an average man or woman. For a moment, the pair of us were locked in a staring match, neither able to divert his gaze. Then, I heard a click behind me. Bastian's musket, I supposed, which caused a momentary flinch from the enormous feline, followed by a deafening bang. A puff of smoke appeared and lingered in the air around us. I pulled Coral and her younger sister to the ground as the cat pounced, leaping clear over us and landing with frightening poise on one of the crew members. The poor boy barely had time to let out a scream before the tiger devoured him. By this time, Bastian had reloaded his musket and fired a second shot. This time the bullet met its target, the shoulder of the beast, and the creature limped forward before collapsing on the soft earth. It was then that I noticed the foaming at its mouth. When we were sure the beast was no longer breathing, I inched my way toward it and lifted one of its eyelids cautiously. The veiny red look of its eye struck me as out of the ordinary, but I could think of no explanation or reason for its crazed appearance.
Poison,
suggested Bastian, holstering his musket into the wide sash around his waist. What sort of poison causes one's eyes to bleed and mouth to foam? I had never seen anything like this back in my world, or in this one, in the brief time I'd ventured here. Nevertheless, we persisted in our journey forward through the dangerous and uncertain jungle. At one point, we came to a most beautiful tree, blossoming with vibrant orange fruit and tiny yellow blossoms. The tree's roots were rough and gangly and seemed to almost fully encircle a structure of crumbling stone beneath it. An odd spectacle, to be sure. It was nearly noon when we arrived at the curious and enticing tree, so one of our crew members approached it to eat of its fruit. Upon setting his fingers to one of the plump fruits, the man recoiled and dropped the fire-hued item to the ground. He grasped at his fingers as if he'd been burned. Then, before our eyes, his shape shifted and shrunk from that of a full-grown man to a small, helpless rodent, a chinchilla, I later learned. While the rest of us looked on, the chinchilla, formerly our crew member, ravenously returned to the orange fruit that now lay on the ground and began to nibble at its juicy rind. The insides of the fruit were a deep, saturated red, a pulpy mess that dripped down the creature's fur. When it had consumed nearly half of the fruit, the chinchilla turned to us and darted its eyes from one of us to the next. At this point, Coral made a stunning observation.
His eyes, they're bloodshot, just like the tiger.
The creature scurried toward Bastian, foaming at the mouth and baring its small but formidable teeth. Our burly companion again withdrew his musket and aimed it directly at the critter, who cowered at the sight and disappeared into the bushes.
Stay away from the fruit of this tree,
Ginger instructed as she looked closely. From what brief interactions we'd witnessed, it seemed that a touch to the fruit transformed individuals into animals, while the eating of it caused the wild craze that now possessed our former crew member. Now it all made sense to me why the place had been given the name Island of Beasts. For who could even attempt to count the number of adventurers, explorers, and pirates who may have found their way onto such an isle? And now, I feared, they roamed the land in forms more furry and mottled than ever before. Coral bent down toward the roots of the tree, where she wiped a patch of dirt from the stone beneath it.
It seems this tree was planted here to protect something.
She muttered, noticing a set of grooves etched into the stone.
Something important.
Something, we all agreed, like the mask of memories.
Treasure Hunters, a Kingdom of Florida adventure, is a production of Lamplight Universe, based on the Kingdom of Florida novels by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Treasure Hunters is written and produced by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Starring Femi Kozlowski as Coral, Ben Tidwell as Thatcher, Jedidiah Montalvo as Jeanmarc, Comfort Olugbuyi as Ginger, Thomas Contreras as Cesar, Ben-Oni Francois as Bastian, and Taylor Thomas Smythe as Jessie. Narrated by Nicole Johnson. Additional voices provided by Kevin Gomez, Ben Tidwell, and Taylor Thomas Smythe. For more adventures, visit kingdomofflorida.com.